Hello, my name is Steven, and welcome to my tutorial to set up the Abyss web server from Aprelium on Debian Linux. Now today we're actually going to get to do that in this lesson. We're going to install the Abyss web server. There are a few things we have to do first, so go ahead and log into your server. I'm going to log in as root. I'm going to get my IP address by typing in IP space A. And so we have what my IP address is here. Now, what we need to do is set a static IP address for the server. Your router acts as a firewall, and it blocks all the requests to the web server because it blocks any unsolicited requests. And so what we have to do is go into our router and set up something called port forwarding. And if you've ever messed with other web servers before, or other kinds of servers, you've probably already done some port forwarding. But if you haven't, that's okay. And so we want to make it so that the router, when it receives requests on port 80 or port 443, which are the web server ports, that it will send those requests to our server. Alright, so one key thing we need to understand is our network device name. Now yours will probably be something different. I'm guessing it'll be ETH0 or ETH0. So make a note of that. You'll have to know that here in just a minute. And then your IP address, we want to change it to something else. And let me bring a notepad text file in here. This is what we want it to look like. This is going to set up our IP address. And we need to make this change in this file. The etc/network/interfaces. Okay, so our editor is Nano. There we go. So we're editing etc/network/interfaces. Remember, this is the name of my network device. We need to change some things. Instead of allow hot plug, we want that to be auto. We change this DHCP to static. We want to set our address, which for me, I'm in the 192.168.11 subnet, and so you can pick something different. You're probably going to be running 192.168.1, but you'll have to check your router to figure out what that is. So you want to set the appropriate subnet. So we set the address, and we can set the net mask. I'm going to set the network. This is the first, well, it's actually not an IP address that you can use, but it defines the network, and it's usually .0 of whatever subnet you're working in. And if you don't know, if you're in the 192.168, the last digit's going to be 0. That's pretty standard. Our broadcast address is the other reserved IP address. The .0 and .255 you can't use if you're, again, running in one of these subnets. And the gateway is probably the address of your router. That's standard. We want to set the DNS servers that we're going to use. And you can choose the ones that your computer currently has, or you can pick some different ones. You can use 1.1.1.1. If you like Google, you can use 8.8.8.8. And then there's the new 9.9.9.9. I believe that's Cloudflare. And so you can pick which ones you like, and we'll leave it at that. And then we're going to save it. And again, to save it, I just do Control X, which will exit Nano, and then it will prompt us that we should save. So Control X, save modified buffer. We pick Y for yes, and then it just confirms that this is the file name we want to write this information to, and we do. Now, one thing to note before we save this file, we need to look at our IP address, and we also need to consider the range of the DHCP server in our router. So for instance, if your DHCP server on your router gives IP addresses between 192.168.1.2 and 1.254, we want to change that. A good starting range for the DHCP server would be 192.168.1.100. That's my recommendation. And what that means is when devices request an IP address from the router, they're going to get one somewhere between 100 and 254. And since we set our server to be .10, then we won't clash with any other device on the network. And so just something to keep in mind. You may have to adjust your DHCP settings. And so whatever your range is, make sure that the address you set for your server's IP address, make sure it's outside of the DHCP range. So what we need to do is go ahead and save it. I hit enter and it's done. Now it does not take effect. If you want it to take effect, what you have to do is type if down. If stands for interface, and then you need to type in the device name of your network interface. So for me, ENP0S3. Now do understand this is going to cut network connectivity to your server. So if you're logged in via PuTTY or WinSCP or FileZilla, you're going to get kicked out. And so that's why we're doing this actually on the server itself. And then we have to do if up to bring the interface up. And look at that, we've got our new IP address. Now this one's still hanging around. It shouldn't be that way. So I'm going to go ahead and do a quick reboot and I'll be back. Okay, we've rebooted. Now I'm going to log in as root again. I'm going to type IP space A, and you'll see we just have the one IP address, the one we want. So everything looks good. Let's make sure we have network connectivity. So go ahead and ping your router address, which for you is probably 1.1. For me it's 11.1, and that's good. Now ping an outside address, for instance Google's DNS server, ping 8.8.8.8, and you'll see we're getting responses. That's good. So we have network connectivity, and the next thing we need to do, now that we have this static IP address, is we need to set the port forwarding in our router. So in order to do that, we need to log in into our router, and we'll make those changes. Okay, I've logged into my router. This one's a little dated, but it still works just fine. And your setup will probably look somewhat similar. So here on the left, we have all our settings, our basic setup, content filtering, maintenance, and then advanced. In most router setups, the port forwarding option is going to be under advanced. So let's go there. All right, so we want to add a service, and we're already provided some defaults here. If it happens to look like this, you have an entry already set up for HTTP. You can go ahead and use that, and you put in your IP address of your server. We'll go ahead and do this as a custom service because this will probably look like more what you'll have on your router. But let's do the custom service. And we're just going to call this web server. It doesn't matter what you name it. TCP or UDP. You can have both, but what we want is TCP. Everything over the web works over TCP. The web does not use UDP, so there's no reason to enable that. Our port is 80, and if you happen to be given the options for a starting and an ending port, make them both 80. And then the IP address of your server. And then you hit apply. Oh, it didn't like the space up here at the top, so we'll just take it away. There we go. Now if you want to do HTTPS, you have to do another one. So we'll make another port forward entry. HTTPS. And again, it's TCP. Your port number is 443 and the same IP address. And apply. Okay, so we have both ports going to our server, and so anytime an unsolicited request comes in for port 80 or port 443, the router will send those requests to the server, which is of course set up to handle these ports. And so we'll move on to the next part of the tutorial here. But if you have any trouble with port forwarding with your router, get the model number, which this particular model is WGT624, and get the brand of your router, and go to Google, type in the brand, type in the model number, and then type in port forwarding tutorial or port forwarding instructions, and hit enter, and you should get a pretty good set of information as to how to do port forwarding for your router specifically. Alright, so we'll move on from here. Okay, now that we have made the changes to port forwarding in our router and we have a static IP address, we can change all our configuration we need now from PuTTY. So go ahead and enter in the IP address. Port 22 is the standard for SSH, and we go ahead and log in, and it's going to tell you, since you changed the IP address, it's going to warn you that the key is not in the cache. That's fine, just hit yes and you won't see it again. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and log in here. Alright, the nice thing about PuTTY that you can't do on the server computer is you can resize the terminal. You can get bigger and smaller, so you can work with it at any size you want. Alright, so what we're going to do now is we are going to add a user for the Abyss web server. A lot of daemons do that in Linux. They'll create themselves a user. So we're going to type add user Abyss. Okay, so we've added the group and the user. We've associated the user and the group together. And this is automatically done by Linux. Creates a home directory. And now we need a password. I'm just going to type something simple, and you can pick something a little more complicated, hopefully. I'm just going to do ASDF. Retype it. It wants a full name, and you do not have to enter anything here, but I'll just go ahead and do it. If you want to specify anything else, you can. Well, I'm just going to hit enter and cycle through all this, and I'm going to say yes, the information is correct, and we've done it. So now if we go to the home folder, which is where every user folder is except for root, we do an ls, we see Abyss is now there. So we've created the Abyss user account. Now we're going to go ahead and go into that Abyss directory. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to become the Abyss user. There we go. I'm going to go into my home folder, cd tilde. There we are. Now what we need to do is download the Abyss web server. I'm going to go ahead and bring that up here, the Aprillium.com website, and it says Abyss web server X1 is absolutely free. Get your copy now. And so it says free download. We'll go there. And we're not actually going to download this in Windows. We have to do it on our server. So what we want to do is we want to get the link. And you can see down there in the bottom left, that's the link. I'm going to right click on the URL, and I'm going to copy the link address. Now if you're using a different browser, Firefox or anything else, this might be worded a little bit differently, but you want to copy the link for this URL. Alright, done. Now what I'm going to type in is wget. I'm going to put a space, and then remember in PuTTY to paste, we right click with the mouse. And so there we go, wget, and it's going to go ahead and spring into action and download it, and it's done. If you do a directory listing of your home directory, there it is. Now what we need to do, this is like a zip file, it's called a tarball, and it's gzipped. And you don't have to worry about what all that means. The fact is it's a compressed file, and It's several files rolled into one, like a zip file. So we need to unzip it, so to speak. So we need to untar it. So we're going to type the command tar space xzfm. Then we need to type in the file name. Now again, you can autocomplete. Just type AB, tab, and there you go. It fills in the rest. Okay, done. Now let's see what changes it's made. Now we have the Abyss web server directory, and we're going to go ahead and enter into that. What do we have there? These are scripts. You notice if you're logged in as root, everything is just white. But here we have some color information because we're logged in as a different user than root. You can change that for root if you'd like. But the things in green, the files in green, are executable files. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the Abyss WS script. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type a period and a slash, and then I'm going to type in this file name, Abyss WS. Okay, it says a configuration file was created. Now browse to this URL, and it says the default host on port 8000 is up and running. So that means our website is running at this URL. Now you say, wait, it's supposed to be on port 80. Don't worry, we'll go ahead and fix that. First thing we need to do is go to our console URL. Now do note that 127.0.0.1 only works on this system. It will not work from our web browser. So we need the IP address of our server, and then we'll tack on port 9999. Okay, so my IP was 192.168.11.10 and a colon port 9999, and there we go. We can choose the language, English, French, or Arabic. Now you need to put in a username and password, and we'll just go with user, the password, pick something that is sufficiently secure. I'm just doing something simple, and we hit OK. Now it's going to prompt us to log in. So enter the login user and then your password. And then you can tell your browser to save it if you'd like. Okay. So it looks like everything is up and running successfully. Now we're going to go back to PuTTY, and we're going to stop the server. So what we're going to do is we're going to type Control-C, and that will stop the server. And you can see signal number 2 received, shutting down the server, and it is stopped. Now we need to log in as root. Now I was root previously, so I'm going to type exit. If you were not root previously, you type SU, and then you type in your password for the root account, and we become root. Okay, you'll see I'm in the home folder. You may be in a different folder, whatever you were when you were root last. And so we need to go to the Abyss home folder. I could do that by typing CD Abyss, since I'm already in home, or I can use that tilde shortcut, CD tilde/Abyss. Okay, CD tilde no space Abyss. There we go. Okay, so I'm logged in as root. Now I can change it to port 80 in just a minute. But the first thing I need to do is go into the Abyss web server folder, so CD Abyss WS, and we're going to run this auto start setup script. So in order to do that, I'm going to type /auto start setup, and I'm going to type the word install. And what this will do, as its name implies, is that when the router starts up, it's going to automatically turn Abyss on for us, so we don't have to manually turn it on. Okay, done. That was simple enough. We will go ahead and start the Abyss service because it just created the service files for Abyss. So we're going to type, now remember we're the root account, so we can do this. Service Abyss WS start. Done. Now we'll go back to our browser, and we will verify that it's running. Okay, so I'm going to copy the IP address of the server, and I'll go over to the new tab, paste it in there. Now don't forget, we're running on port 8000 at the moment, so we need to enter 8000, and there we go. Congratulations, Abyss web server is up and running. Now we're running on port 8000. How do we change that to 80? I'll just go back to the console, configure the host, go to the general tab, and default HTTP port of 80. Hit OK. Now we've got to restart to make that take effect, and that's going to take just a little bit here. Okay, here we are, and now it is changed. It's on port 80. We can come back here, we can remove that nasty port 8000, and look at that. We are successfully running. Alright, now the next thing we want to deal with is in PuTTY. I'll show you where your files are on the server. Alright, so we are in the home Abyss and then the Abyss web server directory. And if you look here, you see the folder htdocs. And that is where our web files live. Now you say, what if I want a simpler path than this one right here? I'll show you how to do that. My preference is to have a public HTML folder right in the root of the file system. And so we'll go ahead and do that. What I will do is, first of all, make a directory called public_HTML. So what I'm going to do is create something called a bind mount. And what that will do is you can access this folder here, and the contents will be what's in this folder here. So let's go ahead and type that in and make it happen. Mount -- bind. Now we have to type the path of the files in the web server folder, so we can just paste that in there. We'll put an ending slash on there just for good measure, and then we want to tell it where it should link to, where the bind mount should take place at, public HTML. Okay, so now you've seen the contents of this directory right here. Now that should be reflected in the contents of this directory. So we'll do ls-al public HTML, and look at that, exactly the same. So what we have just done is made a bind mount, but the mount commands that you issue in Linux are only temporary. They only last until you reboot the system. It'll undo all of these mounts that we've done during our current session. So how do we make this permanent? We'll go ahead and take care of that. We're going to use our editor nano again, and we're going to edit the file /etc/fs tab. And this tells us what we have mounted so far in our file system. And what we want to do is we want to type /home/abyss/abyss web server, or ws, and then htdocs. That's where our files live, our web files, and we want that to be accessible from public HTML. And then just a couple of spaces, the number doesn't matter. We type the word none, a couple more spaces, type the word bind to make it a bind mount, which is the type that we need. A couple more spaces, 0, a couple more spaces, and 0. And these different columns, where you see spaces, they correspond to this right here. So file system would be the htdocs folder. The mount point is public HTML. There's no type. The options are bind, and these options dump is 0 and pass is 0. So all we have to do is exit this, exit nano, save it, Y for yes, and enter, and it's done. So now we can verify the changes. We can type cat /etc/fs tab. And there we go. Our new line is right there. And so when we reboot, it's going to undo this command here. This command will no longer be valid. It'll be forgotten and erased. But since we edited the fs tab file, this will take effect at every reboot. And so what that means is you can always access your HTML or your web documents here, and the real place they will live on the file system is this location. Now I want to tell you one more thing that I did that I recommend that you do, and go back into nano etc/fs tab. I put in on the mount point of the /, which is the root file system, the options for the root partition or root file system. I added this no del alloc, which means no delayed allocation. And so I just put a comma in there, and then I put the no del alloc. And the reason for that is this is not a default option, but I think it should be because of the ext4 file system that we're using. If you were to have your system lose power for an unexpected reason, you didn't properly shut the computer down, you might have some file corruption, and I've actually experienced this before, and it is a headache to try to fix sometimes. And so it is much, much safer if we just add this option here. And so go ahead and make that change in your fs tab file, exit, save it, and when you reboot, it'll always be mounted with that option. So that's just a word to the wise. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to reboot so that you can see that these changes we've made still apply. So I'm going to go ahead and reboot, and I'll be back in just a moment. Okay, I have just rebooted, and if you want to check on Abyss, I'll tell you how to do that from the command line. I've already logged back in with PuTTY, and go ahead as the root account, type service abyss ws status, and you'll see we get some information about the server. We see that it is active and running, and then it tells you when it was started up, and it tells you that that was 1 minute and 15 seconds ago. It gives you the process ID number and then the command that was issued to start the server. The -D there means in daemon mode. And then we have other tasks that Abyss is running. And then just a little bit from the log files. Some information here. Now you'll notice that in my PuTTY window that it kind of cuts off the ends of these lines here. So how do we view it? We'll just hit the right arrow key on your keyboard, and there it'll show you the rest of it. And we hit the left arrow and we can scroll back horizontally. You can see that we're not back at our prompt here at the bottom of the screen, and so in order to get out of this we just type Q, and then now we are back at the prompt. Okay, so we've verified that Abyss is running, and we can see that in the web browser. And so we'll just refresh the console, and you see we're still up and running. And I'm refreshing the page, and it's still up, so we're good to go. All right, back to PuTTY. By the way, there's one more way to check the status of services in Linux, and it's probably more of the proper way to do it, and that would be systemctl space status and then the name of your service, and you notice the information is just the same. What we're going to do is we are going to make a group, a Linux group that is going to be the group that has ownership of our public HTML files, our web documents. And I'm going to go ahead and not be root anymore, just to show you how to do these commands as not being root, because I told you that's a good practice to get out of. You don't want to be root. So we will go ahead and become the regular user, the unprivileged user, that does have sudo privileges. Okay, I'm going to go to the root of the file system. Okay, I'm going to type sudo group add, one word, and then we're going to make the group called www. The first time you do this after booting up, you've got to enter your password. This would be the password for user. All right, there we go. Now we need to add me, the user account of user, to the www group. So to do that, again, we need sudo usermod dash little a capital G. And by the way, with these options, you can also put a space and do a capital G with another dash. It's just a different way of doing it, but it means the same thing. And then the group is www, and the user account name is user for my scenario, and you just put in your username. Okay, so now let's verify that that has taken effect. We type the word groups, and then we put in our user account name. And you'll see what groups I am a part of. User and sudo, we learned about that a while ago. And then you notice I'm now a part of the www group. So now what we're going to do is we're going to give ownership to the www group for the public HTML folder. And so I am going to use my user account as being the account owner for the public HTML folder, and I'm going to give the group ownership to the www group. Done. Okay, so now we do ls-al and of the public HTML folder, and for the dot, you'll notice that it is owned by user and www. So that's exactly what we want. Okay, now we need to install a package called ACL, Access Control Lists. And so first of all, we're going to update our package directory on our system. Sudo apt-get update. And it's going to go ahead and download the newest information. Very good. apt-get install ACL. And before I forget again, sudo at the beginning of the line. Okay, access control lists have been created. Now this gives us a new feature. We can learn a little bit more information about our folders now that we have ACL installed. Okay, so I'm going to go into the public HTML folder, and what I'm going to do is first look at the contents of the folder. Now I'm going to issue a command get f ACL, and then you can specify a file or a directory. And so we're going to do the dot directory, which simply means the current directory that we are in. Okay, and so it tells us the file name, which is a directory, the dot, the current directory. The owner's user, the group is www, and then it tells us our permissions for the user, the group, and the other, which of course simply corresponds to the information you find up there. Okay, now we're going to add a special permission, now we need to preface with sudo, chmod g+s. What is the S permission? Well, it's called the sticky bit. And so we're setting the sticky group bit, and we're going to apply that to the current folder. And then if we do get fackle again, you'll notice we now have this flag, the sticky flag for the group. Okay, one more thing I want to do real quick. I want to give write permission to the group. So sudo chmod g+w to the current directory. And there we go. We have write permissions. Okay, we'll go ahead and add some permissions for others as well. This is for your web documents. You can decide who you want to have access to the folder. And we're going to go ahead and give all others read and execute permissions on the directory. Alright, now we're going to set the access control list, -D for directory, -M for modify. We're going to set the default group permissions at RWX for the current directory. Now we're going to go ahead and make those changes for others, and we're not going to give them write permissions. Now I can put the dot, or I can go ahead and just write out the whole directory there. Done. Now we're going to get the ACL, and we're going to notice it's going to be different than what's listed here. Okay, now you notice the differences. That would be the addition of the default permissions. So what that's going to do is that is going to change what happens when we add files to the directory. So we just added this file right here, and you notice it's given read and write permissions for the owner, which is user, read and write permissions for the www group, and it's world readable. And so that's the way we want it. Everything's looking good. Now one thing we need to do is, since the Abyss web server is going to obviously need access to these files, read and write permission as we eventually install PHP and other applications, we need to add the user Abyss to the group www so that it can have group ownership of anything that's in our web documents. So in order to add the Abyss user to the www group, we need to type sudo usermod -a capital G, the group name, and the Abyss username. Okay, that's done, and we can go ahead and test that by typing groups and then Abyss, and we can see that they are a part of the www group now. That's good. Now one thing that we still need to do is to change these two files here, change their permissions to make everything like test.txt permissions. So in order to do that, sudo chmod group plus write. We can also specify other permissions we want to change. We'll do comma o plus r, and then we'll specify our files. And we can actually do two. We'll just list two different files, and there we go. And you'll notice that test.txt has the exact same permissions as the other two files. They were already here. Okay, now one of the last things we need to do is we need to make these two files owned by the www group. So to do that, sudo chown Abyss as the user. We'll keep that the same, but we'll change the group to www. We'll specify our files, and there we go. So the last thing we need to do is remove test.txt, and look at that, everything looks good. Now we can dump the rest of our web documents in the public HTML folder, and they'll be ready to be served by Abyss. And so that'll wrap up this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we're going to be looking at installing packages. We've already done a little bit of that. We've installed a few different things, but we're going to understand it a little bit further, and we're going to install PHP, and then we're going to integrate that with Abyss. And so that'll be the next tutorial. That'll wrap it up for this tutorial. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.